Aloha and welcome to a Hana Kakou, a weekly program on the ThinkTech Hawaii Broadcast Network. I'm Keli'i Akina, president of Grassroots Institute of Hawaii, where we believe in individual liberty, free markets, and limited accountable government. Today we're going to talk about a safe and secure Asia Pacific, and there's quite a bit that goes into that mix. A great deal of it is behind the scenes, and some of it involves civilian advisors helping our government to make wise choices, whether they're political leaders or military leaders. There's a cadre of experts that do the thinking in think tanks as well as policy organizations, and we have the privilege today to be with one of the most premier in the world, Ralph Cossa. Ralph is the head of Pacific Forum, which is part of the Center for Strategic and International Studies. The organization is based in Washington, D.C., but the Pacific Forum has its headquarters here in Hawaii. The privilege we have of being with Ralph is that there are few people who have his level of direct knowledge, whether it was from his time as a military officer or the 30 years he's spent as an advisor to government and civilian organizations in terms of what to do about foreign policy in the Pacific Rim, Asia area, and the Near and Mideast. But it's my pleasure today to be talking about a safe and secure Pacific Asia region with Ralph Cossa. Ralph, welcome to the program.
Thank you very much. My pleasure.
Well, delighted. Our hearts resonate with the greatness of America and helping America live up to its greatness.
That's right.
In many ways. Our viewers now will obviously know that we're in the midst of what is called a government shutdown.
Right.
And I was just wondering if you had some thoughts on how that affects something extremely important, which is the image of the United States, what we project across the world, particularly in your area, the Pacific Asia region.
This is one of my primary concerns. When you pick up the newspapers, it's all about the Democrats versus the Republicans and who's scoring points and this and that.
So it's just the blame game we see in the beltway of politics.
But, who are the winners, who are the losers? The real loser is all of us. The U.S., its image abroad. I've just come back from a four-country trip. I was in Burma and then in Thailand and then Korea and then Japan.
So you've got fresh data from the field on what our image is out there. What is it?
First question in any country: when are you guys going to get your act together? What's the problem? Why can't you govern yourselves? Why should we follow the American example? And I wrote an article recently which reminded the Republicans, remember Ronald Reagan's shining city on the hill? You guys just turned off the lights. It's just crazy.
How about that? You also have another metaphor in there, and that is our current president, President Obama, has said we have a pivot strategy.
Right. That's right. And so right now there are two major meetings going on this week in Asia, and he's not at either one of them. And he didn't even send his vice president because he has to stay home to hold somebody's hand. So we have third down in line, the Secretary of State in there with the heads of state of all these other countries, what does that tell them about America's commitment and about America's being back in Asia?
Well, one of those meetings is the APEC,
That's
the
correct.
Asia Pacific Economic Cooperation, and we held that event here in Hawaii a few years ago.
2 years ago, that's right.
And
last year it was in Vladivostok, and Obama missed it. This year it's in Indonesia, and Obama has missed it. So that's 2 in a row now that more time focusing on where somebody goes on vacation than what they're doing and what they need to be doing in order to represent America abroad.
So one of the things I hear you saying about the American foreign policy now is that in the midst of our political debates between Republicans and Democrats, we're not seen as having a unified policy, or as you put it, we're not leading. And in contrast, isn't it the case that whether we're talking about Beijing or whether we're talking about North Korea, whatever happens behind the scenes, there's a united front in terms of a message or posturing, even if that's all it is, that comes across.
That's right, and we are seeing more and more, as the only term you can use is dysfunctional, and our diplomats go out and try to explain to people why the American system makes sense, why democracy is better than not democracy, and they look at us and they say, you want us to be like you? Are you kidding me? We at least can pass a budget. We at least are allowed to travel. We can do things. So it makes it very difficult. It hasn't stopped some of our leaders, and particularly some of our congressional leaders, from arrogantly going around telling everybody else to be like us, but they're not listening anymore. And the reason they're not listening is because we're not credible. We're losing our own credibility by our inability to govern. You know, we know, okay, the government is shut, quote unquote. What does that mean? It means you can't get into the Smithsonian. The Pentagon's still working, other places are still working. But to the rest of the world, it makes it sound like America's just come to a standstill, we're in gridlock, nothing is happening. So the image that we're portraying abroad is one of a country that can't even lead itself. So would you want to follow someone who's incapable of leading themselves? It just destroys your credibility.
So the political play on the way in which we are portraying the shutdown is actually saying more to the world than we really should be saying, because I haven't heard that we've shut down the United States military. In fact, we've brought back from furlough those people who have support services that they provide to the military, and it looks as though quite clearly we are functioning at the essential level, but as you say, our parks, our museums, and other functions have shut down. And
but this is also part of what foreigners see.
Yes.
You know, when you save up, oh, I'm finally going to America, and then you get there, sorry, we're closed. You know, the Smithsonian, wonderful national resource, closed. I mean, that's embarrassing. It's embarrassing.
So I want to ask you this question. How important is it to our interests and to national security, not only for the United States, but for the free world, for us to portray strength and unity and leadership under our chief executive?
I think it's absolutely essential. I think that, you know, the president had the right idea in many respects. His whole idea about the pivot to Asia, the, you know, refocus on Asia, this is where our future is. It's important. It's not new. George H.W. Bush talked about the Pacific century. Bill Clinton talked about 21st century being the Asia-Pacific century. But we got sidetracked with Southwest Asia. Now we're trying to get back, sending the right message, but it's got to be credible. And the way that message is credible is you've got to put your money and your body where your mouth is, and we're not doing that, and that's, I think, very unfortunate. Well,
currently the administration has been promoting the Trans-Pacific Partnership as its version of a dynamic program by which we can lead the world. Absolutely, the gold standard. But how much success do you think we're going to experience in gaining a cooperation or agreement to this, given the image that's being portrayed by the United States?
I mean, it's hard to believe that any country would seriously negotiate with us knowing that the president would not be able to get a TPP agreement through his own party right now, much less through the Republicans. The Republicans would be more inclined, many of them, to support a free trade agreement than the Democrats. But they won't do it just because it's Obama's. Well, you know, so it's just absolutely crazy where we've put ourselves. And in the meantime, how can we convince somebody to sign up for a free trade agreement with us? The president doesn't have fast track authority, so that means that it's going to be subject to all the worst political wrangling from both sides. It just makes it very difficult to get the nation's business done.
What are some of the real consequences economically that we face by not being able to get a free trade agreement?
Well, I think that, you know, if the rest of the world was stopping and waiting for us to get our act together, it'd be wonderful, but they're not. So, you know, the EU has been doing its own free trade agreements with folks. There's this RCEP, the Regional Cooperative Economic Partnership, I guess it is, which is sort of China-led and Southeast Asian-led, and they're moving forward with their own free trade agreements. So we're sitting here, we're a day late, and we're going to be a lot of dollars short if we don't get moving on these things.
You mentioned earlier that the president is not attending the APEC, Asia Pacific Economic Cooperation Summit this year, as last year he did not attend. But he was here in Hawaii in 2011 when it was held here. And I want you to change your hat a little bit. Not only are you CSIS from Washington, D.C., but you're also Pacific Forum. And your very location in Hawaii should speak to Hawaii playing a pivotal role diplomatically, economically, and militarily with the world. But what are your thoughts about the aftermath of APEC and how well we have actually followed up on that great opportunity where we had 13 heads of state here in 2011?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think we followed through very well, and we don't seem to, following through is not one of our strengths, it appears, you know, and so I think we need to be building on that. Now, the good news is Secretary Hagel was just at the ASEAN Defense Ministerial Meeting Plus and invited all of the ASEAN defense ministers to come here to Hawaii next year, and they're going to be doing that. That again, I think, will help to showcase the importance of Hawaii. You know, people in Asia see us in Hawaii as being more sympathetic toward Asia, toward the Asia Pacific. They like to come here. It's a good sort of halfway meeting point. People in Washington, people in Tokyo or Singapore. It's, you know, it's about halfway. So I think we can build on that. We should be building more on that.
It's also culturally comfortable.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, there's certainly a bridge that goes between Washington, D.C. and Beijing or other major centers of power in the Asia-Pacific region. But there's a back door, wouldn't you say, that Hawaii could be?
I think that's true. One of the problems, quite frankly, is that we're better here than elsewhere. I think if you have to go through customs anywhere in the United States, you're better off doing it in Hawaii, where at least they're friendly and smile and say aloha.
That's right.
But the process, we've made it so difficult for people to come to the United States. You know, if you're a Filipino, a perfect example, a Philippine retired general, former national security advisor, West Point graduate, I wanted to invite him to a conference we were doing here in Hawaii. He was told he had to go to the embassy and get interviewed by some 22-year-old caseworker to see whether or not he was trustworthy enough to get a visa to come to the United States. It's mind-boggling, you know. I mean, and this is the way we treat our allies, our friends. Then, you know, God forbid you're not one of our friends, then you really get treated nasty. We got to do better if we want Hawaii to be a central location for these kind of meetings. We got to make it easier for people to get to the United States. And,
do you think
we don't do that?
Do you think that visas are being used as a political football in terms of our relationship with China and other countries?
No, I mean, I wish it was that. You can deal with that better. What happened, of course, is after 9/11, we became completely paranoid. And the visas went from being a State Department function to being a Homeland Security function. So the State Department feels bad if they annoy people, if they offend people. Homeland Security, if we offend 100 people and keep one bad actor out, we've done our job. It's a different mindset, and that's the mindset we're in now. It's, you know, it's you're guilty until proven innocent, so you have to prove that you're innocent before you're allowed to come to the United States. That's pretty demeaning, and particularly to, you know, since we can't profile, you have to treat a Filipino general the same way you would treat somebody that just came out of one of the madrasas in Pakistan, and you go, you know, there's got to be a better way to do this kind of stuff.
Before we go to a break for this first segment, I want to come back to Hawaii, because probably most of our listeners and viewers are here in the state of Hawaii. What could we do? What would you suggest to make sure that we take advantage as Hawaii of the upcoming ASEAN summit that will be held in 2014? What could we do differently than we did when APEC came here?
Well, I think first of all, we need to sort of have a game plan for what's going to happen after that. That meeting is just all the ministers coming together, but what you want to do is have their deputies, their military chiefs. I mean, the Pacific Command will do that. They have their defense chiefs meetings, things like that. You've got to. You don't want this to be a one-off. You want to be able to do other things that support it, that feed into it, that come out of it. And then you have additional meetings and follow-on meetings and follow-on projects where you demonstrate the value of this cooperation. It's not just a photo op, but there's actually some real work that's being done, and that takes the extra effort.
And I would imagine there needs to be a very good commitment on the part of both the government here locally and business as well. We'll be right back in a moment, but we're talking with Ralph Cossa, with more than 30 years of experience advising our government in terms of security issues in the Asia Pacific and the Near East and Far East regions. He's the president of Pacific Forum, which is part of the Center for Strategic and International Studies, and we'll be right back with him. What I'm going to ask him when we come back is what are the hot spots now that we need to be looking at in terms of the Asia-Pacific region. This is Keli'i Akina with Grassroot Institute. You're watching ThinkTech Hawaii Broadcast Network. Aloha.
Aloha. I'm Nicole Horry for ThinkTech. For nearly half a century, the Hawaii Foreign Trade Zone No. 9 has brought the benefits of the Foreign Trade Zone program to Hawaii businesses and entrepreneurs. DBET, the Department of Business, Economic Development and Tourism, operates Hawaii's Foreign Trade Zone program to encourage international business and economic development. The Foreign Trade Zone's mission is to increase the amount of international trading activity in Hawaii, thereby providing employment opportunities for the residents of our island state. For more information, see ftz9.org. I'm Nicole Horry. Mahalo.
All right. Very good, Ralph. Aloha and welcome back. This is Keli'i Akina, president of Grassroot Institute. You're watching Hana Kakou. That means let's work together. We're a weekly program on ThinkTech Hawaii Broadcast Network. And I want to say thanks to Jay Fidel and the entire team for putting on such a great network program. We're broadcasting live here from Honolulu, and we know we have a worldwide audience. So aloha, come to Hawaii and build our economy. If you want copies of this program or any other program, go to thinktechhawaii.com. And we've got the entire archive there. Today, we're talking about a safe and secure Pacific Asia region, and I couldn't be talking with any more knowledgeable individual than Ralph Cossa, who is the president of Pacific Forum of the Center for Strategic and International Studies. He spends more time traveling the world, sharing his wisdom and influencing what's going on behalf of our country, as well as listening and picking up information. And we're going to continue our fascinating discussion with Ralph and learn a little bit about some of the hotspots in the Pacific Asia region. Ralph, so what are some of the major areas of concern? The ones that come top of mind are North Korea, China, our relationship, the Taiwan Straits, Manila, and so forth. In your capacity of providing strategic advice and so forth, where do we need to be concerned?
Well, obviously North Korea sort of tops the list as far as immediate problems, and it's been an area where we've been struggling with for 40 years and are no closer to success. In fact, in some cases, things are worse off, and we tend to, keep beating ourselves up. Well, must be we're doing something wrong. Well, it's just you're dealing with the North Koreans, and they don't make life easy, and it's not their job, and sort of finding ways to play us against everyone else that's their full-time job. That's what they do. And they've learned how to do it pretty well.
Some analysts have said they actually do that job very well. They've got a united front. They know how to saber rally.
It's life or death for them. So that sort of focuses your attention. The regime wants to stay in power.
Sure.
The only way they can do that is by playing this game. There are other things that they could do. There are things we wish they could do. There are things we've tried to get them to do. But at the end of the day, people say, "Oh, the North Koreans are irrational." Nonsense. If you say that, what you're really saying is, I don't understand why they think what they're doing is rational, because no one does anything that they believe is irrational. So you've got to sort of put yourself in their shoes and say, now, why do they think what they're doing makes sense? A, because it's worked. B, because it keeps them in power. C, it creates dissension among the other folks. So you've got to sort of break that mindset, and I think that's one of our big challenges, and it's a difficult challenge. Everyone talks about the rise of China, and certainly we have to manage the rise of China, but China has to manage the rise of China first and foremost. I'm relatively optimistic when it comes to China, because we run a young leaders program where we bring young people, the next generation, into our meetings. And you talk to 20-year-olds in China, these kids are smart, they understand how things work, they're looking to make the world better. So I think we got to sort of keep plodding along, but I'm happy to talk about it more, but I think we're essentially on the right track.
Well, talking about China, I mean, very often when we think of North Korea in monolithic terms, that there's one frame of reference and so forth. But in China, where we have a little more transparency, aren't we learning that there's a growing diversity of views even within the Communist Chinese Party, especially with a good number of them educated through programs like yours, but more than that, through graduate degrees in the West and so forth?
No, absolutely. It's first of all, some Chinese friends would sort of jokingly lament, in the good old days, we knew what Chinese policy was. Whatever Mao thought, that was Chinese policy. Whatever Deng Xiaoping thought, that was Chinese policy. Whatever Xi Jinping thinks is what Xi Jinping thinks, but he's got 6 other guys on the standing committee, and he doesn't have an absolute voice. Hu Jintao was a very weak leader. He really, even if he had some ideas, he wasn't going to be able to move things if he couldn't bring others along with him. So it's a different world. There are multiple viewpoints, and they're counterbalancing viewpoints. North Korea is a perfect example. It used to be, I'd go to China and I'd say, you guys need to do this, and I'd hear, I talked to 20 different people, they all had the same story, arguing back. Now you go to China and start talking about North Korea, and you sit back and listen to the Chinese argue with other Chinese about whether or not their policy makes sense. There's much more diversity of view, much more competition for influence there, and that's a healthy thing. And I think we need to recognize that.
To what extent do you think in China today the military and political policies are being influenced by economic thinking and economic development?
Well, first of all, it's all related.
Yes.
You can't be an economist and not understand political science, and you can't be an international relations guy and not understand how trade and economics and even the environment, when we talk about we're a security-oriented think tank, security has now become so broadly defined that it includes global warming, that it includes environmental, it includes the yellow dust that comes in. All of these impact country-to-country relations. So you've got to sort of take a look at the broader picture. And obviously these are all different elements competing for influence. None of these would be of concern if China didn't suddenly have the world's 2nd largest economy.
Absolutely.
That makes you stand up and notice. Mm-hmm. Now, what does that mean? Well, we're not sure exactly what that means. I'm not an economist, so it's always dangerous when political scientists start talking economics. So you can correct me, or at least warn your readers or listeners in advance. But everything that you do with China, including looking at their GDP, you then have to divide by a very big number, and then it becomes still a great deal of challenge. I mean, there are 2 Chinas. You go to Shanghai. Shanghai is more expensive to live than Honolulu. On the other hand, you get out I was out in the Tibetan region here a couple of months ago. It's still pretty cheap to live there, but that's not the China everyone's worried about. What we're worried about is the more advanced. So there's really 2 Chinas out there competing internally against one another, and the one they're trying to raise up, the other one is, so there's a great disparity. There's a disparity in income, there's a disparity in status, there's all sorts of disparities that the Chinese have to deal with. These are all challenges that they have. So you ask 100 Americans who has a bigger economy today, China or the United States, 2/3 of them will say China. That's nonsense, but the image, the shadow. I tell people in my lectures about China, beware of the Wizard of Oz effect. Remember in the Wizard of Oz?
Yes, the man behind the curtain.
That's right. The dog looked behind the curtain. So we're Toto. We're the guy looking behind the curtain, saying, "Look, there's this little 4'10" guy casting this great big shadow." Yeah, you got to be aware of that shadow, but also you got to be aware he's still only 4'10", and he's got a lot of growing to do.
And that's an important frame of reference to keep in mind, that a good deal of what we know about China is the result of posturing to some extent. Yeah. And for example, a recent response from Beijing to Washington D.C.'s concerns about human rights was met with, well, we're the largest holder of American debt. Yeah. And is there anything to that from a security point of view, the extent to which China is the largest single debt holder of the United States? How does that impact security issues?
Well, I mean, it doesn't. It doesn't. There's the old joke. If you owe the bank $1 million, you're in trouble. If you owe the bank $100 million, they're in trouble.
There you go.
So in the old days with the Soviet Union, we had mutually assured nuclear destruction.
Yeah, mad.
Now we have mutually assured financial destruction.
There you go.
Right? So and this is not by accident. I mean, what we did after World War II, we took a look at the experience in Europe. First 50 years, Germany rose twice, pretty ugly both times. We didn't this time try to hold Germany down. We tried to raise Germany up. We tried to raise Japan up, but in an interconnected world,
That's
economically, politically interdependent. And we've had a happy ending. 100 years ago, people were worried Germany was going to take over Europe. Now they're worried it won't. You know, please, Germany, please do this. It's a whole different mindset. The same thing with Japan. Nobody worries about Tora. The Japanese are going to invade again because we have interconnected economies. That's what we're trying to do with China, and I think we're doing it. At the end of the day, it's going to be the generation after this that leads China that will make the determination whether or not they want to be the Germany of the first half of the 20th century or the second half. I'm betting on the second half, but you got to hedge your bets, and that's what we do.
Right. What I hear you suggesting is that China's economic interests is one of the factors leading to security, because the United States is perhaps its largest market, for one thing. In addition to that, if we're not in good shape, we can't pay the interest on our debt to them, which is a cash flow issue.
It's more than just that. You know, I mean, right now there's a lot of tension between China and Japan.
Yes.
But the Chinese will not allow that to get out of control. For one reason, there are 10 million Chinese working in Japanese-owned plants in China. Japanese pull all of those plants out, that's 10 million unemployed people. You know, so we look at the Chinese economy today, but how much of that is American and Japanese, and European and Korean and Australian companies in China? 20 years ago, they were in Korea and Taiwan. 20 years from now, they're going to be in Indonesia, they're going to be in Vietnam, they're going to be in Bangladesh, they're going to be in other places as China, you know, cashes itself out of the market as it rises, just as Taiwan. And that's the good news. Taiwan rose, South Korea rose. They've moved into different kinds of economy. The same thing's going to happen in China. So part of this image of, China is so powerful and so economically strong. Yeah, but a lot of that is not Chinese firms. It's American firms and British firms and German firms. And and 20 years from now, those guys are going to be somewhere else. So we do all of these straight line projections, even though everyone knows the world doesn't work in straight lines. And convince ourselves, you know, in 10 years, 20 years, China's going to be bigger than the rest of the world combined.
Yes.
To me, that's nonsense.
And
political science.
There you go. Yeah. And taking a look at the sources of Chinese economic strength, they're not necessarily exclusively Chinese. As you know, Grassroots Institute is part of a broad network of think tanks, including the Heritage Foundation. And the recent report by Heritage Foundation is the most economically competitive regions in the world are number 1, Hong Kong, number 2, Singapore, number 3, Australia. But that Hong Kong experience is something China cherishes, but also Taiwan. That's an interesting one, and I want to ask for your thoughts about the Taiwan relationship. It seems we're running into Taiwanese everywhere. I run into them in China everywhere as an educational advisor foundation, or even here in some of the security organizations. What's going on in the relationship between China and Taiwan, and how does that bear on U.S. and global security?
Well, I mean, the good news is that when President Obama and President Xi met for their shirt sleeve summit, Taiwan took up about 30 seconds.
And you say that's a good news.
We have a one China policy. We don't dispute that. Good, thank you very much. Set it aside and let's go on and talk about things. There have been times in our relationship where Taiwan would have taken up the entire thing because either Chinese were paranoid about Taiwan or the Taiwanese politicians were making the Chinese purposely paranoid. And so the fact that we have good cross-strait relations right now, we have a president in Taiwan who has decided that it's not in his interest to jab a stick in the dragon's eye. It doesn't mean that he's prepared to become a province of China. No one in Taiwan wants to do that. You know, you do the polling, it's like 7 or 8% in China that long for reunification. The rest of them think that Taiwan's fine just the way we are. Thank you very much.
Well, let me come back and we'll finish talking about Taiwan at the top of the next segment. But this is Keli'i Akina with Grassroots Institute on the ThinkTech Hawaii Broadcast Network. We'll be right back with Ralph Cossa, president of Pacific Forum, after this very short message. So stay with us.
I'm Bill Spencer, president of the Hawaii Venture Capital Association. We do monthly luncheon programs with ThinkTech about things that matter to Hawaii entrepreneurs, investors, and business service providers. So join us on the fourth Thursday of every month at the Plaza Club. For information about upcoming events or to join our mailing list, visit hvca.org. See you there.
Aloha, welcome back to Hana, Kakou, a weekly program on the ThinkTech Hawaii Broadcast Network. Hana Kakou means let's work together, whether it's locally or globally. Today we're talking about a safe and secure Asia-Pacific region. I'm with Ralph Cossa, president of the Pacific Forum, a true expert in understanding security issues, whether they are in the Pacific Rim or Mid or Far East. Today, our conversation has now brought us to the place of talking about the relationship between Taiwan and China. And as you point out, Ralph, it's good news that in recent discussions with D.C., Taiwan has not really figured prominently. The less said, you say, the better. And yet, there's a lot more going on, isn't there, in terms of the interconnectivity of Taiwan and mainland China than would meet the eye?
Yeah, no, I think that, the Taiwanese have done a lot of investment in China. I think part of the Chinese miracle is thanks to Taiwan ingenuity. There was a time when when our trade with Taiwan was bigger than
Taichung. And one of the interesting things to me, and my field, of course, is philosophy. At conferences I attend throughout China, I'm always running into people from Taiwan. They're not there as Taiwanese, they're there as part of an educational forum and so forth. And we have seen the reemergence of an intelligentsia, something which was mowed down during the Cultural Revolution, so to speak. And during that time when China decided that it would create a simplified character set, Taiwan fiercely began to preserve the traditional character set, which is the key to the ancient Chinese classics. And now those resources are being used throughout mainland China to help people be re-educated in the classical traditions.
That's right. And
what do you think?
Of course, all the national treasures of China
are
in the museum in Taiwan because they brought them with them. And thank God they did protect them from the Cultural Revolution and things that happened afterwards. So it's...
Does that portend good news in terms of the relationship?
To me, it does. Again, I think if China wants reunification, it's got to make itself a lot more attractive to Taiwan, which means it has to become much more democratic. It has to become much more open, much more free market, and all of that. But no one's setting a clock. No one's setting a timetable to this. All the Chinese really ask for is that Taiwan doesn't do anything that precludes eventual reunification. So when a party comes to power in Taiwan and it says, we're going to declare independence, that forces the Chinese hand. But if they say, we're going to have one China, different interpretations, which is what we have now, we think we're that one China, you think you're that one China, and then that papers it over. It leaves the fig leaf in place. And fig leaves are small, but they're pretty important. They prevent a lot of embarrassment. And so this is, to sum it up in a word, that the current government has kept the fig leaf there, and that makes the Chinese comfortable, and then they're able to get on and do the other things that both sides need to do. And to me, that's the good news.
And there are back doors, obviously, that are at play.
And front doors. I mean, it is now, it used to be, it was maddening. I'm going to be in both Taiwan and Shanghai in a couple of weeks. Actually, this coming weekend I'm going. I get on a plane in Taipei and fly direct to Shanghai. It takes an hour and a half. Used to be we had to fly to Hong Kong or Macau, land, change planes, fly on. It was like an 8 or 9 hour trip to get from Taipei to Shanghai or Beijing. Well, now they're doing this directally.
The economic incentive is there now.
They've managed ways to work it out.
That makes sense. Very good. Well, let's go a little bit northwest to, let's talk about the Dalai Lama. Here's another case where we have this front door, back door relationship, and a good number of Americans see this through a certain filtered lens, that there is this human rights abuse, there is a case that appeals to a good number of American sentiments. What's really going on here as we take a look at Tibet?
My sense is that, and I'm not an expert on Tibet, but my feeling is that one of the problems is everyone is looking at this in black and white terms, and it's a very gray area. So the Chinese will tell you, we prevented human rights abuses because the Buddhists used to be terrible to all the children, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. We have preserved Tibetan culture. So, good. I went to Lhasa. Our Chinese guy took us to this big museum of Tibetan culture to show off how they're preserving it. The first room is dedicated to the Chinese liberation of Tibet. Now, most Tibetans don't feel like the Chinese liberated them, so it just sort of rubs their nose. They're just
I see
past one another.
I see the perennial infomercials on public Chinese TV whenever you're in China. There's always some documentary on the liberation of Tibet.
And the Chinese seem to think that when the Dalai Lama dies, they're going to appoint the next Dalai Lama, and the Buddhists are somehow or other going to follow this person, and then we'll have a happy ending. That's nonsense. I mean, the Dalai Lama has already made it clear that he's going to appoint his successor, however he wants to do it. The Chinese have appointed a Panchen Lama. Nobody reveres him because they're still looking for the real Panchen Lama that the Chinese have sort of made disappear.
This is kind of like the appointment of popes during the Middle Ages in Europe.
Yeah, that's right. In fact, I have an ancestor who was the Medici's pope at one time.
Go.
So we had our own pope in the family. In my view, the Chinese have made a fundamental mistake by not negotiating with this Dalai Lama, because if they cut a deal with him, he could deliver on it. Any future Tibetan leader is going to be less capable of cutting a deal, but again, that takes political courage, it takes political leadership, it takes a Mao or a Deng Xiaoping, and we don't have that in China today.
Well, let's go south a bit now to talk back a little bit east and talk about the Philippines. There are a good number of relatives of people from the Philippines here in Hawaii. Hawaii has a major Filipino population, and a good number of them are very committed to their family back home. It's
and
major
veterans who served in the U.S. military and served us very well.
And sending money back to the Philippines is a cottage industry in Hawaii.
And not just in Hawaii, in Singapore,
that's right,
and Taiwan, a lot of different places that rely on relatives sending money back home.
So what are the security issues that are affected by the crime rate in the Philippines, the drug lords and so forth?
I think there's a number of problems. The drugs have certainly gotten out of hand. We used to joke that there was like a coup a week in the Philippines, and in any other country you try to have a coup, you get thrown in jail. In the Philippines, you try a coup and they make you a congressman. So it's sort of
or a movie star.
Yeah. There's no penalty to it. So it's a problem. I think they're trying to get their act together now. Somebody once told me if the Philippines could put two good presidents back to back, they could get over this.
Well, perhaps.
Fidel Ramos was fantastic, but because at that point they were so paranoid about having another Marcos, that someone like Ramos, who really should have had another term and sort of move things forward, was prohibited from doing that, and then they just sort of went downhill, and now they're sort of digging their way back out.
Well, after our final break now, I want to come back and ask not only for the Philippines, but for the entire Asia-Pacific region, what is it that we can export from the American experience, fundamental American values, our commitment to democracy, if we can regain that role of leadership, what is it that we can bring to this region, and what can we gain from them? And we're going to be right back. I'm talking to Ralph Cossa, who is the president of Pacific Forum of the Center for Strategic and International Studies. Just a great talk about security issues in the Asia-Pacific region and the relevance of them to Hawaii. You're watching a Hana Kakou, our weekly program on the ThinkTech Hawaii Broadcast Network. I'm Keli'i Akina with Grassroot Institute. We will be right back after this.
Aloha, my name is Dan Bauer and I'm the General Manager of the Plaza Club. The Plaza Club is Honolulu's premier business club. We're located in the heart of the financial district on historic Fort Street Mall. On the 20th and 21st floors atop the Pioneer Plaza, our commanding skylight views, along with our award-winning cuisine and service, are known as the place to do business downtown. We offer professional as well as social events and programs to our members and their guests, all tailored to enrich their professional and personal lives and to give them the cutting edge that they deserve in business. Why don't you consider becoming a member of the club? Call me at 531-7788 or come see me and let's talk business and how the Plaza Club can work for you. Again, my name is Dan Bauer. I'm the general manager of the club, and
Welcome back to the final segment of today's Hana, Kakou. Let's Work Together, a weekly program on ThinkTech Hawaii Broadcast Network. You can see today's program by going to the Grassroot, that's singular, grassrootinstitute.org website, or go directly to thinktechhawaii.com. And you'll find many programs such as this. We broadcast 5 times a week or 6 times a week, a lot of content that deals with the world and with Hawaii. Today we're talking about a safe and secure Asia-Pacific region, and that takes intelligence, that takes thinking, that takes strategy. Ralph Cossa has been bringing all of that together for at least 3 decades, and he's the president of Pacific Forum. We're going to ask him a little bit about the CSIS, Center for Strategic and International Studies, and the Pacific Forum as we return for our final segment. So Ralph, tell us a little bit about this organization. It's been around 50 years, I know, headquartered in Washington, D.C., but it has a global impact, and you lead up the Asia-Pacific component here in Hawaii.
That's correct. I mean, CSIS itself was, for the last 2 years, has been selected as the #1 foreign policy and security think tank in the world. So we're very proud of that heritage and our association with them. Pacific Forum actually started in 1975 as an independent organization. It was started by a retired admiral named Joe Vasey.
Joe Vasey.
Joe is 96 now. He's still going strong. I still get emails from him. He's still writing op-eds for Wall Street Journal and places like that to try to get America on the right track. And God bless him, he's still as sharp as a tack and as devoted as ever to America. Joe started the Pacific Forum because he believed there was a better way of doing things in Asia. We needed to be talking with people, not dropping bombs on one another. We needed to convince Asians that America still mattered. 1975 was not a happy year for Americans, helicopters on the roof in Saigon, et cetera, et cetera. And also to convince Americans that Asia was important. We all know that now. In 1975, people were not that aware, and that was Joe's mission. In 1989, when he retired, we merged. Pacific Forum became part of CSIS, and our programs are aimed at Asia Pacific security, broadly defined. CSIS has a global mandate, of course.
Now, you're not only a think tank with the PhDs and lawyers and ex-military and so forth. You also reach out quite a bit to a younger generation of young men and women who are in the professions and who are affecting their own nations. I've got a little brochure of one of your programs here. Tell us a little bit about the Young Leaders Program that you've
We're incredibly proud of this. We will celebrate in February our 10th anniversary of the Young Leaders Program. We have over 500 young people from 40-some different countries who have now been to at least one of our conferences. When we hold a senior level meeting, we will invite young people to come in and sit in the background, listen to the wise elders, but then come together and tell us what we're missing. Let's provide a new generation. Let's provide some fresh thinking. On any given day, we have a half a dozen or more young people in residence at Pacific Forum as part of our fellows. That's to try to bring down the average age. Vasey and I sort of sure it in the other direction, so we're trying to bring it down by bringing some 20-somethings.
So what is the average age?
It's still pretty high, I'm afraid. But
in addition, you actually go into the various countries and sponsor seminars and training. I know that I ran across a few of your people. Yeah. I was lecturing at Fudan University in Shanghai.
We do programs with Fudan. We do a U.S.-China meeting, and we'll bring in 20 or so young people to sit in and provide a younger generation viewpoints into these meetings. And a lot of these people we have PLA officers, we have American military officers, we have Japanese military officers. They come in, sit in on these conferences, and then go home a little bit smarter, a little bit more aware of what's happening in the world.
And not only that, I would suspect that when they go back with a few stereotypes dispelled. stereotypes
Absolutely.
that their
Absolutely.
own country has about America.
I mean, they go back with a lot of stereotypes to spell. They also go back with a new Rolodex.
There you go.
And
that's the Gwen Chi, the
10
influence.
years from now, 20 years from now, these kids are going to be in leadership positions, and they can pick up a phone if they're Japanese and call Chinese or call Koreans and say, hey, remember me? I used to do X, Y, and Z with you. We were Pacific Forum Young Leaders together. We're already starting to see that. We've got a couple of our younger Japanese from 10 years ago who are now Diet members, who are
That's
now
incredible.
moving up in the military chain, defense officials, foreign ministry officials, the same in the United States. So these young folks, I'd say kids, but they're now 30, 35 years old, but that's still a kid to me, but a lot of other people think that's an adult. So they're picking up a phone and talking to one another, and they know each other because they've been in this program 10 years ago.
And maybe someday they'll pick up a red phone.
and hopefully defuse a problem.
We'll be celebrating in 25 years the coming together of heads of states who are graduates of the leadership program.
We have at least a couple I'm willing to bet will be heads of state one day. I mean, these are the best and brightest.
To what extent does the fact that whether we're talking about Beijing or any other number of countries, students are coming to the United States, getting their graduate degrees, and then going back and serving in government, to what extent does that impact the security situation
I
in the
think
world?
it has an amazing impact because, first of all, as you say, they've gotten rid of some of these stereotypes. They have a much better feel for who we are and what we're trying to do and what we're trying to accomplish. There's nothing like being there. There's nothing like knowing people, and you don't be there by going to a conference and staying in a hotel in Shanghai for 3 days. I mean, you've got to go out and live in these countries. You've got to interact with them. You have to defend your country abroad. This is a great challenge, not just for young Chinese in America, but for young Americans in China.
Absolutely.
And this is, to go back to our opening comments, we make it pretty tough for young Americans today to explain to people why the American system makes sense, because it doesn't make sense to us.
And that's part of why we take a strong role at Grassroots Institute, as you know, of educating and promoting about individual liberty and about free markets and holding government accountable. We're running to the end of the program now, but to what extent do you feel that people in Asia are embracing the idea of individual liberty and free markets?
I think they are very much, and in the article that I was writing about our dysfunction, and so many articles I've read, it's sort of like China is eating our lunch. The Chinese are looking good while we're looking bad. No one's lining up to move to China. No one says, gee, I wish my government treated me the way the Chinese government treats its people. That's not our problem. Our problem is ourselves. With the old pogo statement, we have met the enemy and he is us.
Well, great.
We've got to get our own act together. We've got to provide a much better example. People want to follow the American dream, but they also want us to follow the American dream. And if we don't do it, it makes it very hard for anyone else to see it credibly.
Ralph, that's a great statement to stop on. Thank you so much for being with us today.
My pleasure.
And I appreciate it greatly. You've been watching Ralph Cossa on the ThinkTech Hawaii Broadcast Network. This is a Hana, Kakou, a weekly program. I'm Keli'i Akina with the Grassroots Institute, and I want you to know Ralph has written a dynamite article about how the current government shutdown is affecting our image in the Asia-Pacific region. You can get that at the grassrootsinstitute.org website, as well as be able to view this session and other programs that we've put on. This is Keli'i Akina, wishing you the best until next week on Hana Kakou on the ThinkTech Hawaii Broadcast Network. Aloha. Ralph, thank you very much.
My pleasure.
Thanks very much. Great program. I learned a lot.
This was fun.